All right, let's just dive right into this. Welcome to today's Explainer. Right now, we are stepping into the ring to moderate the absolute ultimate structural showdown between the world's two macroeconomic heavyweights. We're talking capitalism versus socialism. If you've ever wanted a clear, high-energy, totally no-nonsense breakdown of how these two massive systems actually operate under the hood, well, you're in exactly the right place. We're going to put them side by side and see exactly how they stack up. So here's the tale of the tape for our 5-round analysis. We've got Round 1, ownership and control. Round 2, the decision makers. Round 3, the operational engine. Round 4, competition and power. And finally, Round 5, the equity check. All right, let's ring the bell.
Round 1, ownership and control. Okay, before anything is built, bought, or sold in an economy, we gotta ask the big question: who legally holds the keys to the physical resources? And notice the sheer contrast here. On the capitalist side, economic resources, the land, the factories, the machines, they're owned by private individuals. The legal right to private property is absolute. But flip over to the socialist side, and it's a completely different story. The state owns all the economic resources. The right to private property? It's entirely absent. The community, acting through the government, basically holds all the keys.
To really grasp the capitalist position here, we have to understand the concept of private property. And look, this isn't just about, owning your own house. It's the right of individuals and companies to own, acquire, use, and sell productive resources. This is literally the very essence of capitalism. It's the core incentive driving wealth accumulation, saving, and investment. But hey, physical ownership is only half the battle, right?
Which brings us to round 2, the decision makers.
So, moving from physical ownership to the sheer power of making daily choices, who actually calls the shots? Well, under capitalism, you have absolute freedom. Consumers buy exactly what they want, and producers make exactly what they choose to make. It's completely uncoordinated, but highly, highly free. Socialism, on the other hand, trades that individual economic freedom for structure. Consumers and producers don't call the shots autonomously. Instead, all those decisions are managed top-down by a central planning authority. Now, the crucial point is understanding what this authority actually does in practice. A central planning authority is a socialist government body that takes on the absolute mammoth task of allocating all productive resources. It single-handedly decides what gets produced, how it gets produced, and for whom it's produced. So comprehensive economic planning completely replaces the sort of uncoordinated freedom of the individual market. Moving right along to round 3, the operational engine. Ding, ding! Okay, so we know who owns things and who decides, but what's the underlying engine actually keeping these economies running day to day? On the capitalist side, the engine runs completely automatically. Production is driven by the price mechanism and a relentless profit motive. Basically, if it makes money, it gets made. But on the socialist side, there's no automatic market. The engine requires deliberate, highly calculated economic planning, and the driving force isn't profit at all. It's maximizing social welfare. Let's just quickly define that capitalist engine, the price mechanism. This is the process where the market forces of demand and supply interact to determine prices and coordinate the whole economy automatically. Adam Smith famously called this the invisible hand. There is no central agency pulling the strings. The market organically dictates where resources flow based strictly on what people are actually willing to pay. And this represents a fundamental shift in motivation between the two systems. Capitalism operates entirely on self-interest. The maximization of profit is the absolute sole motive of producers. It's all about personal enrichment. Socialism flips that script entirely. Maximizing social welfare subordinates individual interest to the greater good of the community. So economic activity is meant to benefit the whole rather than just generating wealth for the one.
Round 4, competition and power.
When you have these two completely different engines running, what happens to rivalry? And where does economic power ultimately concentrate? Well, capitalism is defined by intense, cutthroat market competition. And while that rivalry promotes efficiency, it means economic power naturally concentrates in the hands of a wealthy capitalist class. Socialism, however, completely eliminates competition. Because the state holds a monopoly on production, rivalry is replaced by cooperation, and absolute economic and political power concentrates directly in the hands of the government. Naturally, these power structures have massive societal consequences. Free markets and private accumulation inherently result in class struggle, a constant tension between wealthy capitalists and everyday workers. The socialist model aggressively targets this by aiming to establish a classless society. Since everyone works for the state and unearned property income is abolished, the gap between the haves and have-nots is meant to just disappear completely. And finally, round 5, the equity check. We've looked at the structural rules, but what are the actual real-world outcomes when it comes to the distribution of wealth? The contrast is honestly undeniable. Capitalism naturally and inevitably generates large inequalities in income and wealth. You'll see multi-story mansions right down the road from poverty simply because resources naturally concentrate among successful private owners. Socialism operates on the principle of egalitarianism, actively working to distribute wealth equitably and drastically narrowing that wealth gap. The crucial point to remember about egalitarianism in the socialist context is that it's not about forcing absolute, down-to-the-penny equality for everyone regardless of their effort. It's a principle aiming to provide equal opportunities to all by preventing extreme wealth accumulation and eliminating unearned property income. It definitely recognizes some income differences based on skill, but it aims to totally eliminate the massive wealth gaps that are inherent to free markets. Okay, let's bring it all together with a master scorecard for the entire 5-round clash. Just look at how perfectly the structural DNA of both systems maps out side by side. From who owns the resources, to who makes the decisions, the engines driving them, where power sits, and the final equity outcomes. It's basically the ultimate macroeconomic matrix, showing two completely opposite approaches to solving the exact same human problems. Which leaves us with this final, burning question to close out our explainer today. If capitalism's intense freedom creates large, unavoidable inequalities, but socialism's quest for equality restricts individual freedom and relies on massive government power, where does the real world actually find its balance? Do we have to choose a pure side, or is there a way to somehow mix the best of both worlds? Keep that in mind as you look at the mixed economies operating all around you today. Thanks so much for joining me on this structural showdown.